Rumination is the worst, right? I really dislike when I get stuck in rumination. So today I'm going to share with you a 5-step process to stop rumination. And you can, over time, with practice, stop most of your rumination. For those of you who are new to my channel, my name is Barbara Heffernan. I was a psychotherapist for 20 years. I am still licensed. I'm an approved EMDR consultant. I specialized in anxiety and trauma, and then I created this YouTube channel to weave many wisdom traditions together to help people live more joyful lives. So if you do support what I'm doing here and you like this video, please do give it a like and please subscribe to my channel. Those things are super helpful. All right, let's get into the topic. I think it's important to start this with a discussion of what rumination is and to really think about what it is, because rumination is focusing your attention on your distress and on its possible causes and consequences, right? That's what rumination is. It's a focus on distress and going over and over what the causes and consequences of this distress are or were. There's no focus on solutions, or the focus is on how there is no solution, right? So that's what rumination is. Now, rumination tends to have certain themes, and I want to lay them out here because I think it is very helpful to know what your themes are. What are the common elements of what you ruminate about? Because that's going to help you when we get to step 1 of the 5-step process in terms of recognizing rumination. So the common themes of rumination are, one of them is blame. Blaming yourself or blaming someone else or blaming both or going over and over who's to blame. So blame, a very common focus of rumination. 2, it's not fair. Why me and it's not fair is another very, very common, non-productive focus of rumination. 3, a situation around a past relationship that didn't end well or has ended in your current distress, and going over and over the elements of that past relationship. 4, a past event, and going over and over how that event led to where you are now, what you might have done differently, what you should have done differently, what someone else should have done differently, going over and over that you feel contributed to your current distress. And then the 5th common area for rumination is focusing on your current mood. Going over and over how depressed you are or anxious you are, or why am I feeling this bad, or why am I so upset about this, over and over and over with a focus on a current negative mood. So I want to jump in and talk about why our brains do this, why we might even be inclined towards rumination, and then also say that some amount of rumination is normal. Most people might ruminate once in a while when something happens, or they're just going over and over something that they're uncomfortable about. But if it is a habitual pattern, if rumination is really occupying a lot of your brain space, then it may actually be the root cause of your current distress. The rumination itself, not what you're ruminating about. So rumination is very tied to depression and anxiety. Rumination is also a component of OCD as well as ADHD. It's an element of eating disorders, and it's also very tied to substance abuse. So habitual rumination is destructive and leads to its own problems. All right, I'm hoping that makes sense to you. So really working on how you can change your brain state, right, your mental state, so that you don't ruminate so much. And I know that's why you're here. So I also just want to talk a little bit about how our human brains are kind of wired to ruminate almost. Like we have a negativity bias. It's very well researched. And the human brain is also survival focused. So the human brain really focuses on negative events that we feel are somehow survival related, right? And we often feel that our relationships are core to our sense of self, to our survival. So they're really good fodder for rumination. And I do have a webinar that goes into this in more detail in terms of what our brain's almost natural inclinations can be, which can lead to things like rumination. And that webinar, the link is below, and it's called Rewiring Your Brain for Joy and Confidence, because we can rewire our brain. Okay, so if you're interested in that, check out the link. It's free. And I also just mention it here so you know that it is sort of a normal thing, yet it can run out of control. So the 5-step process to stop ruminating. I'm going to talk about each step, and then at the end, I will summarize it again. But the first step is to recognize when you are ruminating and fully accept that it is not helpful. Recognize when you're ruminating and fully accept that it is not helpful. Sometimes people feel like, no, I have to go sit alone in my room and really think about this and go over it and over it and over it. If you really feel like there is some benefit to this rumination, you will not get over it. So really being able to recognize when you're doing it and that it's not helpful. So that's one way that those 5 themes might help you recognize it. And then step number 2 is to label it. Label the thinking pattern rumination. And I think it can be helpful to actually say out loud, this is rumination, it is not helpful. So label your thinking pattern. This is rumination, it is not helpful. And saying that out loud, and if you're not in a place you can say it out loud, it's fine, say it to yourself. But saying that will actually interrupt the rumination. You might go right back to it, say it again. You might go right back to it, say it again. Continually interrupt the pattern of rumination by stating externally or internally, this is rumination, it is not helpful. And there are 2 reasons that this labeling is so important. One of them is attribution. What we attribute our problems to, what we attribute our thought patterns to, makes a huge difference in how we feel and function and what happens in here. So attributing this to a miswiring, a rumination, a habitual pattern that's not helpful will begin to help you get over it, because if you attribute the rumination to the problem you're ruminating about, right? If you say, no, Barbara, you're wrong. I'm only ruminating because this difficult situation happened with somebody I really care about, and I said the wrong thing, and then they said the wrong thing, and that's why I'm ruminating. Well, if that's how you feel, you will never get rid of the rumination. And by its very definition, rumination is not productive. Rumination is not actually figuring something out or moving towards problem solving. So attribution, what you're attributing the rumination to, is very important. And if you attribute it to a habitual pattern that's not helpful, you will be able to get over it easier. And the other reason this is super important is that we can't actually control some spontaneous thoughts that pop into our head. And we might have sort of individual thoughts that pop into our head that trigger the rumination, and we want to cut it off. And you may never be able to stop those sort of individual thoughts that pop in there, like, oh yeah, that just happened and whatever. Stopping that thought may not be possible, but stopping it from developing into rumination is possible. And you can always comment below. Let me know if this is making sense to you. If you try this for a week, come back, let me know how it is going. Step number 3. And step number 3 is an if step. If there actually is a problem here that needs to be worked out, schedule time to do it. Schedule time in your calendar. I will think about the situation that happened and problem solve. Problem solve not so much like what went wrong, but what can I do about it now? So schedule time to plan to address a problematic situation. So that's step number 3. And that helps to address this feeling of like, yeah, no, I can't just stop thinking about this. Like I have to think about it. I have to figure it out. Well, you might need to figure it out because there might be something that needs to be done, either an apology or a shift in a relationship or new direction in a career or how you move forward. There might actually be something productive that can come out of this. And you may need time to think about that and think it through. But rumination is focusing on the problem and its causes and consequences, not the solution. So set aside time to focus on the solution. And the reason step number 3 is optional, it's an if you need to do this, is that so much of what we ruminate about really does not need this step because it's not useful rumination. If you tend to go over and over, why is this happening to me? Why me? Why me? There's no solution there other than stopping the rumination. So there's nothing that needs to be thought through. So that's why step 3 is optional. Step 4, recognize how self-referential rumination is. Now, rumination tends to take place in the me loop in our brain. We have a portion of the brain where our self-referential thinking happens, and when we get stuck in there, it's actually very, very painful. And I call this the me loop. Why did they do this to me? How come I can't do X, Y, Z? It is incredibly focused on myself, right? It's on yourself. It's a me loop. Getting out of a me loop is very helpful to rumination. How do you get out of the me loop? There are many ways, and we're going to talk about that in step 5. But really realizing that the hyper focus on me mainly leads to pain. It's a painful state of being. Curiosity is a wonderful tool to take us out of rumination. Curiosity about what is going to happen later today. What's happening for this person I haven't talked to in a while? Can I just go downtown and people watch a little bit? So really putting the focus outward. And then step 5 is to use a research-based intervention. So there is a fair amount of research on the interventions and the things that people can do to interrupt the rumination cycle. So I'm going to talk about a couple of research-based interventions and then also encourage you to do your own research, because you can try some of these interventions and see what works for you. So one of the research-based interventions is healthy self-disclosure to a supportive person. Now, this needs to be differentiated from co-rumination. If you tend to call somebody when you're ruminating and then you go over and over and over it with them and they either just allow you to keep ruminating or they ruminate about the same thing or similar, then that's called co-rumination, and that is not helpful. But if you have somebody supportive in life that you can really talk a situation through, it can be super helpful. And that person might be a friend, it might be a family member, it might be a therapist, a coach, a counselor, a clergy person. And while that is an intervention that still is talking about me, you're interacting with another person. And if that person is supportive, they can help you walk through it, right? Make you feel less ashamed or less worried. The relational aspect of that can be very helpful. And I know not everybody has somebody they would be comfortable doing this with. I understand that. But if you do, that's a well-researched way to help yourself stop ruminating. Okay, the second research-based intervention that can be super helpful is mindfulness. Mindfulness takes a while to develop. Learning mindful meditation, learning to ground, learning to bring your attention into the present moment, into the sensory elements of what's happening, right? And you might say, well, that's sort of me focused too, but it's in a completely different part of the brain. It's not about who am I, what happened to me, blah, 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 blah. It's about what do I smell? What do I feel? What do I hear? Mindfully being present right here, right now, actually leaves no room for rumination. And mindful meditation and mindfulness is something that everybody can develop with time and effort and possibly instruction. Another intervention is to sing. It is impossible to sing and ruminate at the same time. Really, you can't do both at once. Now, I am not a good singer, but I can certainly sing in my car and my shower, and I enjoy it. And it really can just help us get out of ourselves. Music in general can help, but if you're actually singing along, yeah, your mind can't do all of that at one time. So that's another great way to stop rumination. So the last category of the interventions, which are research-based, are for you to do your own research. For me, downhill skiing is an awesome way to cut through any kind of chatter that's happening up here, because I ski hard, I ski on hard slopes. I cannot think of anything else while I'm skiing, so I love it. But different people have different activities that really can occupy the whole brain. So for some people, it could simply be knitting or caring for your pet, throwing a ball with your dog or your child, playing a sport, taking an exercise class, taking a music class. There are many things that we do that we can enjoy that help get us out of that pattern of thinking. So let me summarize this 5-step process. Number 1, recognize when you are ruminating and fully accept it is not helpful. 2, label it. Say, this is rumination, it is not helpful. 3, If there is actually a problem you need to think about, that there needs to be some planning, then schedule the time. And what I didn't say earlier is that if you schedule a time in your calendar to actually think about the problem, and the problem pops into your head anyway, it pops into your head before that time has come, you can simply say, I'm going to think about that at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, or whenever you've scheduled it for. Or I'm going to think about that when I see my therapist. I'm going to talk about it when I see someone who can help me sort this through. And if it's scheduled and definitive, then that can be a way to redirect your mind. Step 4, recognize the me loop. Recognize when you get stuck in that self-referential, painful thinking. Don't beat yourself up for doing it. You don't have to call yourself selfish, because that's not what I'm saying, but just recognize that the brain is stuck in that painful me loop. And then step 5 is to use a research-based intervention, and you can do the research for yourself. Try different things, see what works. So I truly hope this is helpful for you. And again, I invite you to join me for the free interactive webinar, Rewiring Your Brain for Joy and Confidence. Link is in notes below this video. If you did like this video, please do me a favor, give it a like and share it with somebody it might benefit, and subscribe to my channel. Both of those are very helpful for me in continuing to produce videos to help people live more joyful lives. All right, see you next week.